All right, let's get right into it. Magic, the occult, esoteric practices. I mean, just saying the words can conjure up some pretty strong feelings, right? There's this allure, this fascination, but also, for a lot of people, a very real sense of fear. It's this whole world of secret knowledge and unseen forces. But is the danger real, or is it all just in our heads? Today, we're going to try and figure that out.
And let's just start right there with that feeling of fear. This quote from Christine Wicker really hits the nail on the head. For a lot of us, any leftover cultural belief in good magic, fairy godmothers and stuff, that's pretty much faded. What's left behind is, well, the scary stuff. It perfectly captures that kind of deep-seated cultural anxiety we have.
Which, of course, brings us to the big question for this whole explainer. Are those fears a sensible warning system, or are they just a huge misunderstanding of what these practices are even about? Well, to get an answer, we have to look past the horror movies and into the actual systems themselves. So, to even begin to talk about the dangers, we first have to understand the rules of the game. Contrary to what you see on screen, practitioners don't just wave their hands around and hope for the best. Nope. They operate within these really complex frameworks, and understanding that structure is the key to understanding the real risks. Okay, so let's start with this classic definition from the, let's say, infamous Aleister Crowley. Now, look closely at what isn't in this definition. There's no mention of good or evil, no spirits, no spells. At its absolute rock-bottom core, magic, with that K, is just the act of making a change happen based on your focused intention. The whole thing hinges on the will of the person doing it. That's it. Now, this is where we clear up one of the biggest misconceptions out there. People hear high magic and think that's the good stuff, and low magic must be bad, right? Wrong. That's not it at all. The real difference is all about the how, not the why. High magic is more, well, academic. It's ceremonial, full of complex systems. Low magic is more like a folk tradition, super practical, often nature-based, and focused on getting tangible results, like, say, a good harvest. And believe me, these systems can get unbelievably intricate. This chart here is a perfect modern example of what some practitioners call a cosmological roadmap. Think of it like ancient systems like the Kabbalah. These things aren't just pretty pictures. They're meant to be complex, almost like circuit diagrams of reality, designed to help a person navigate forces that are normally totally invisible to us. Okay, so we've got these complex systems. Now, we can finally tackle the fears head-on. And what's really fascinating here is that the most serious warnings, they don't usually come from outsiders looking in. They come from the practitioners themselves. Let's take a look at what they say about the risks of getting it wrong. You see this idea pop up again and again in so many of these texts. This notion that ignorance isn't bliss. It's actually a huge liability. Just dabbling, messing around without a full understanding of the system you're working in, that's seen as one of the biggest, most foolish mistakes a person can possibly make. And yeah, the warnings, they get a lot more severe. The same author, Garina Dunwich, she does not mince words here. She goes from dangerous straight to potentially deadly. And this isn't about trying to scare people off. From their perspective, it's about outlining what they see as very real-world consequences for treating this stuff like it's just a game. And it's not just one person saying this. You see this sentiment across completely different traditions. Here's a hoodoo practitioner named Zora, and she is just as direct. Hoodoo is not a harmless game. It's blunt, it's clear, the message is always the same. You gotta respect the system or you might face the consequences. So if we kind of group all these warnings together, they seem to fall into a few key categories. First, you've got the psychological risks. One text literally calls it disintegration. Oof. Then there's spiritual risks, like bumping into forces you are not at all prepared to handle. And then you have actual physical dangers, from using toxic ingredients in old recipes to, in some really extreme cases, even deadly practices. So the big takeaway is that the dangers are seen as both internal and external. Okay, but those internal dangers of misusing a system, that's really only one side of the coin. There's another huge external danger that practitioners are always quick to point out: charlatans, scammers, the commercialization of spirituality. The risk of getting scammed is just as real as any so-called karmic kickback. And this slide kind of lays out the difference pretty clearly. According to these sources, authentic practice is almost always focused on inner work, right? Self-reflection, personal development. The warning signs of a scam, on the other hand, well, that's all about exploiting people, creating this dependency where you always have to buy the next book or seminar, and basically just using spirituality as a marketing gimmick. And some insiders are, well, incredibly blunt about it. Tarot author Dusty White pulls zero punches here. He calls the mainstream law of attraction a flat-out lie designed to sell products. He argues it just traps people in this awful cycle where they blame themselves when it doesn't work, which then pushes them to buy the next thing. I mean, that's a really powerful critique coming from inside the community itself. So, we've looked at the internal dangers of just dabbling and the external dangers of scams. Now it's time to pull all these threads together. With all these warnings and all this complexity, where does that actually leave us in our understanding of what this stuff really is? And this, right here, is the central idea you find in so many of these texts. The tool itself is neutral. The system is neutral. The power, and therefore the danger, the responsibility, it all lies with the person using it. Their knowledge, their intentions, their ethics. That's what shapes the outcome. But hold on, because this is where the whole conversation takes a really fascinating modern twist. After all of this, what if the basic principles of magic, using your will to create a change, what if that's something we're already doing every single day? We just call it something else. Okay, stick with me here because this is a wild idea. Some modern thinkers are starting to reframe magic, not as superstition, but as a kind of technology, a spiritual technology. Think of it as an intuitive user interface for reality itself. The argument goes that if the universe is basically just information, well, then magic is just a different kind of programming language. And this final analogy just brings it all home. In this view, a magical sigil is really no different than a desktop icon you click to launch an app. An incantation is basically just a voice command, like, "Hey Siri." Both use symbols to execute a command and cause a change to happen. And that leaves us with a pretty provocative thought, doesn't it? Every time you click a link or send an email, are you just using symbolic language to direct your will out into the world? It's a question that totally blurs the line between the ancient and the modern, and it might just make you rethink reality itself.